This is Letter from America. Today's topic is the ZANU PF regime has violated all the SADC principles and guidelines for conducting elections. General elections in Zimbabwe are scheduled for 2023. The big question is, will the elections be free and fair? Will they be credible? Based on previous experiences, the answer to this question is obvious. It's a big no. And this raises another question. Why is ZANU PF afraid of free and fair elections? In the democratic process, change of government is achieved through free and fair elections. Such a process requires an environment that enables all stakeholders to campaign freely. For Zimbabwe, details of this enabling environment are clearly spelled out in the SADC guidelines and principles for conducting free and fair elections. They are also spelled out in the Zimbabwe Constitution of 2013. Zimbabwe was given the SADC guidelines in 2008 in preparation for the elections for that year. The MDCT under Tsvangirai had complained to SADC that Mugabe routinely rigged elections, especially since after 2000, when the newly formed MDC almost defeated ZANU PF in both presidential and parliamentary elections. ZANU PF half-heartedly followed the SADC guidelines for the 2008 elections. And just as ZANU PF had feared, MDC won both presidential and parliamentary elections. In fact, Tsvangirai beat Mugabe in presidential elections. Tsvangirai won 73% to Mugabe's less than 30%. The margin was so shocking to ZANU PF that it took a month for the election results to be released. And when these results were released, Tsvangirai's victory had been reduced to 47.9% to Mugabe's 43.2%. This forced a runoff when ZANU PF unleashed so much violence that an estimated 1,000 MDCT supporters were killed. As a result, Tsvangirai pulled out of the race because he feared more of his supporters would be killed. The pattern of politically motivated violence has been part and parcel of ZANU PF electoral campaigns. ZANU PF has always defined itself as ZANU Europa, the party of blood. Earlier, they had referenced this slogan to their claims that they had spilled blood when they were fighting for independence. But in post-colonial Zimbabwe, it became obvious that their self-definition, ZANU Europa that is, had changed to that they would use violence to stay in power. They knew they had no chance in hell of winning any free and fair elections, especially after 2000, when MDC under Tsvangirai emerged as a very serious challenger to ZANU PF. In a bid to encourage free and fair elections in the region, SADC crafted principles and guidelines that set out the responsibilities of SADC member states in holding elections. SADC principles specifically outlined 7 areas that must be followed by member states. SADC principles state that the states must do the following. The states must take measures to ensure the scrupulous implementation of these democratic election principles. And the principles were listed as follows. Number 1, establish impartial, all-inclusive, competent, and accountable national electoral bodies staffed by qualified personnel. Zimbabwe has failed to adhere to this principle. Under the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, or ZEC, is institutionally captured by ZANU PF. That is, ZEC is institutionally captured by ZANU PF. It falls under ZANU PF control and manipulation. According to an online publication, Nehanda, the recent appointments of ZEC commissioners have been marred by shocking irregularities and nepotism. Nehanda reports there was public outcry after President Mnangagwa appointed ZANU PF deputy leader Kembo Mohadi's daughter Abigail Millicent Ambrose as one of the new commissioners. Mnangagwa also appointed Catherine Mpofu, who is believed to be a relative of the ZANU PF Secretary for Administration, Obed Mpofu. ZEC has not been transparent at all in its operations, despite the constitutional provision that requires it to be open and involve stakeholders in its decisions. In the 2018 elections, ZEC manipulated the results to favor Mnangagwa. A book written by an exiled member of ZANU PF revealed that Nelson Chamisa, who was the presidential candidate for the MDC alliance, actually won by 66% to Mnangagwa's 33%. But the results were manipulated to give Mnangagwa 50.7% of the votes and 44.3% of the votes for Chamisa. For the 2023 elections, ZANU PF has now seized the mobile national identity registration facilities. It is reported that ZANU PF wants to make sure its members are registered. This is an egregious violation of the free and fair election process. The second SADC principle and guideline for conducting free and fair elections is that member states must safeguard human and civil liberties of all the citizens, including the freedom of movement, assembly, association, expression, campaigning, and access to the media on the part of all stakeholders during the electoral process. Here again, Zimbabwe has been a dismal failure in following these guidelines. Just this year alone, CCC has been prevented from campaigning in some areas. Politically motivated violence against CCC is endemic. Some members of CCC have been abducted, savagely brutalized, and in some cases killed. Top CCC officials like Job Sikala and Godfrey Sitole are languishing in jail on trumped-up charges. Sikala's lawyer showed how much of a farce his charges are. In a statement issued through CCC spokesperson, the lawyer said the new charges against Sikala were based on the same facts, same date, and are based on unfounded charges of incitement to violence. Sikala's lawyer's revelation of the trumped-up charges against him are the clearest indication that ZANU PF's case against Sikala cannot stand in a court of law. ZANU PF knows it too, and in collaboration with the captured prosecutors and the court system, they are extending Sikala's time in jail in Chikurubi. Sikala's lawyer argued that Sikala should not be incarcerated at Chikurubi Maximum Prison because he has not been convicted of any crime. Sikala should instead have been held at the remand prison. Here again was a blatant abuse of Sikala's human rights as a citizen. And this abuse was based on Sikala's principled stand against ZANU PF politically motivated violence against CCC supporters, especially the barbaric killing and horrifying dismembering of Mo Blessing Ali. In a remarkable contrast, in the selective application of the law, a ZANU PF member, Upton Mashanyanyika, recently made a public video inciting supporters to kill Chamisa, but he, Upton Mashanyanyika, has not been arrested. He has claimed that he is simply too ZANU PF to be arrested. What is known is that police are specifically prohibited from arresting ZANU PF members regardless of the crime they have committed. ZANU PF members and thugs can abduct, torture, kill, or rape CCC supporters, and nothing will happen to them by way of arrest. They cannot be arrested. The ZANU PF thug Pius Jamba, who killed and dismembered Mo Blessing Ali, remained free even after he had been reported to the police. Police much later very reluctantly arrested him because of public and international pressure. Reports say this Jamba thug is being treated very well. Unlike Sikala, Jamba is not even in the Chikurubi Maximum Prison. This selective application of the law was demonstrated in a court hearing where the lawyer for Sikala was cross-examining a police witness. The lawyer was particularly interested in finding out how and why the police arrested his client. "We picked a placard that said Ed must go," replied the police witness. "Is there anything criminally wrong with saying Ed must go?" asked the lawyer, adding, "Did the placard say how Ed must go?" "No," replied the police witness. "So, how is it wrong to say Ed must go or to carry a placard that says Ed must go?" asked the lawyer. "As a police officer, we are told to defend Mnangagwa at all costs," replied the police witness. Sikala's sham trial is a textbook case of how ZANU PF frivolous charges against human rights activists and the CCC members always collapse in the courts. Sikala is probably the most arrested human rights activist in Zimbabwe. He has been arrested more than 60 times in the space of 20 years. But Sikala has not been convicted of any crime. Another human rights activist, Makomborero Haruziwishe, was jailed for 1 year before he was eventually granted bail. Up to now, he has not been brought to court for trial because ZANU PF knows that the case against him is very flimsy and ridiculously frivolous. Another MDC activist, Last Mayenga Hama, was released last year after spending 8 years in jail on a trumped-up charge of murdering a police officer. Mayenga Hama was kept in jail despite evidence that showed that the police officer had fallen from a speeding truck in which he was riding and died. Not long ago, a ZANU PF official was reported missing in the Chipinge area. A number of CCC members were rounded up by the police on the unproven charges that they had something to do with his disappearance. And guess what? It turned out that the missing ZANU PF official had crossed the border to meet his girlfriend in Mozambique. The third SADC guideline is that member states must provide adequate resources for carrying out democratic elections. Zimbabwe again has failed to provide resources to CCC, which is the largest political party in the country. Under the Political Parties Finance Act, CCC, then MDC Alliance, lost all its resources when, as MDC Alliance, the ZANU PF government diverted its share to Monzora's MDC. In this year's by-elections, CCC ran without budgetary support from the government. The SADC principles require that the states ensure the transparency and integrity of the entire electoral system by facilitating the deployment of representatives of political parties and individual candidates at polling and counting stations, and by accrediting national and other observers or monitors. Section 2 of the SADC principles provides that SADC member states shall adhere to certain principles in the conduct of democratic elections, namely, full participation of citizens in the political process, freedom of association, political tolerance, regular intervals for elections as provided for by the respective national constitutions, equal opportunity for all political parties to access the state media, equal opportunity to exercise the right to vote and to be voted for, independence of the judiciary and impartiality of the electoral institutions, voter education, accept and respect of the election results by political parties proclaimed to have been free and fair by the competent national electoral authorities in accordance with the law of the land, and the ability to challenge the election results as provided for in the law of the land. These are the key elements in the SADC principles and guidelines in conducting free and fair elections. In all of these principles and guidelines from SADC, Zimbabwe has, by all objective measures, failed dismally to follow the process leading to free and fair elections. A report from the Institute for Security Studies concludes that the political and electoral playing field remains deeply uneven and is stacked in favor of ZANU PF. The report casts doubt that Zimbabwe will fully and objectively implement the SADC guidelines. As the country stumbles towards the 2023 polls, ZANU PF's dominance and the half-hearted implementation of the SADC election guidelines mean the journey will be arduous for political opposition parties. The political and electoral playing field remains as in the days of Robert Mugabe. The ruling party under Mnangagwa has all but perfected its messaging, its use of the law and security institutions against opponents, and the conflation of the party and state resources to boost its position. The Zimbabwe's Electoral Management Body, that is ZEC, remains one of the country's least trusted institutions. The body is populated by former military officials who are not known for their impartiality. Some analysts have noted that the military has positioned itself as the final arbiter in the country's political power configuration. Recent efforts by activist groups like Team Pachelu have revealed attempts at gerrymandering by ZEC. This revelation casts doubts over the Commission's credibility and the integrity of any electoral process it presides over. Traditional leaders like the chiefs, who are custodians of decisive rural constituencies, are still brazenly partisan. There is a slim chance that Zimbabwe's 2023 elections will be competitive. There are new contenders, but the political playing field is as unbalanced as under Robert Mugabe. The report continues that with 14 months to go before Zimbabweans elect a president, members of parliament, and local government representatives, the country is now in full election mode. The ruling ZANU PF has ramped up its campaign, while the new opposition party has sparked hope of a meaningful democratic contest. But the political and electoral playing field remains deeply uneven and is stacked in favor of the ruling party. ZANU PF's campaign is a mix of state events and party activities, with the national broadcaster, that is ZBC, doing the party's bidding, that is supporting only ZANU PF. In the meantime, Chamisa's political opposition, CCC, which put up a spirited performance during the recent by-election, is trying to establish itself, while simultaneously preparing for the 2023 polls. So these were the findings of the report from the Institute for Security Studies on the electoral situation in Zimbabwe. The ZANU PF regime has not only failed to implement the SADC principles and guidelines on conducting free and fair and peaceful elections, ZANU PF has also failed to implement the electoral reforms that are in the Constitution of Zimbabwe that was passed in 2013. While these electoral reforms are in the Constitution of 2013, they have not been codified into the country's laws. As a result, they cannot be implemented for the 2023, just as they were not implemented in the country's 2018 elections. The big question is, why are these electoral reforms not part of Zimbabwe's laws? Why is ZANU PF regime unwilling to implement the electoral reforms? The answer is very easy. ZANU PF is afraid of losing elections if they are conducted freely and fairly, as recommended by the SADC principles and guidelines, as well as the Zimbabwe's constitution. In the elections of 2000, 2008, and 2018, MDC under Tsvangirai and MDC alliance under Chamisa won those elections. MDC won in 2000. MDC under Tsvangirai won 57 of the 120 election seats with 47% of the popular vote. ZANU PF under Mugabe won 63 seats with 48% of the popular vote. In 2008, Tsvangirai won 47.9% of the vote to Mugabe's 43.2%, necessitating a runoff. It was, however, later on revealed that Tsvangirai had actually won 73% of the vote to Mugabe's less than 30%. In 2018 elections, MDC Alliance President Chamisa's victory was manipulated by the ZANU PF-controlled ZEC. The trends in the electoral playing field in Zimbabwe point to a massive manipulation of elections by ZANU PF to favor ZANU PF. This trend is likely to continue in the 2023 elections. But what makes 2023 different is that there is an overwhelming increase in the opposition to ZANU PF. ZANU PF, in its capture of the Zimbabwean state, is now in what is known as an organic crisis. Opposition to ZANU PF is coming from everywhere. According to Antonio Gramsci, the founder of the Italian Socialist Party, a state is in an organic crisis when it faces increased opposition from all sectors of society. In this state of organic crisis, the state will use all means at its disposal to survive. In the case of ZANU PF, violence, manipulation of elections are some of the means that the party is going to use in order to survive. ZANU PF has its back to the corner now. ZANU PF cannot answer a simple question from the citizens. What have you done for Zimbabwe since independence 42 years ago? Just ask any ZANU PF official this question, and you will see how he will struggle to answer that question. ZANU PF resorts to violence against anyone opposing it. ZANU PF is incapable of thinking rationally because it is used to issuing orders that must be obeyed without question. That is the essence of what is known as fascism. ZANU PF is trying to imitate the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, who led Italy from 1922 to 1943. Mussolini founded the cruel thugs called the Black Shirts under his brand of fascism. These Black Shirts, just like ZANU PF militia thugs or the Green Bombers today, were deployed to remove all political opposition through his secret police and outlawing labor strikes. Mussolini and his followers consolidated power through a series of laws that transformed the nation into a one-party dictatorship. Within 5 years, Mussolini had established dictatorial authority by both legal and illegal means and aspired to create a totalitarian state. In capturing the Italian state and repressing citizens, Mussolini was sowing the seeds of his own destruction. Opposition to his rule grew, and he was eventually overthrown and arrested by his former colleagues in the Fascist Party. A similar situation appears to be evolving in ZANU PF, with the cracks that are now appearing within the ruling party. There are calls for Mnangagwa to step down when his term of office ends and to let someone else take over. In Italy, a group of communist partisans, these were freedom fighters, killed Mussolini. Mussolini was hanged upside down on a meat hook in a public square. While there are many similarities in the way Mussolini ended with what possibly might happen to Mnangagwa, there is one indisputable conclusion about how dictators end. The late Mugabe was removed from opposition within his ZANU PF party, but mostly at the instigation of the Joint Operations Command, or JOC. Dictators are rarely removed as a result of free and fair elections. Dictators do not allow free and fair elections. Dictators are removed mostly through the army intervention or massive public protests or rebellion within their ranks. Some of these scenarios, or a combination of them, might be a pointer to how the Mnangagwa rule will end.
This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening.